Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The Endless Frontier Act passed by the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee is a new proposal designed to support a stronger U.S. technology base. That is a move that could be a more substantial play in the ongoing U.S.-China high-tech competition. So how will this act help to renew America's global leadership in science and technology? How will China-U.S. high-tech competition evolve, and what does that mean for China? To discuss all these issues and more, I'm joined by Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, James Andrew Lewis, Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., and Lang Begg, Professor at the European Institute of the London School of Economics and Political Science. That is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Professor Liu, welcome to Dialogue. As always, great to see you. I just want to get your sense of this bill. I mean, how much does this bill have to do with America's competition with China?
Well, I think this is the right thing to do for the United States and also for the humankind to support continuous innovation and through the support of scientific research and technology development. However, the political orientation was more used, first of all, as a rhetoric to persuade a bipartisan consensus over this issue, and identifying China as a foe is something that is really childish. And right now, China is really maintaining an open mindset by supporting innovation by itself, of course, by reducing reliance on the supply of the United States, given the intensified situation between these two countries. But in the meantime, technology by its own nature needs to be shared, and also the treasure that needs to be recruited through commercialization over the globe. So instead of holding a treasure box at home.
Yeah. I think many years ago, we talked to each other. You called me when I was in the States. You talked about this issue of, having an open mind, when it comes to technology sharing, and not overprotecting a country's intellectual property. James, good to have you with us. In April, you said, and I quote, "How much should the U.S. federal government spend? One easy answer is to compare the spending of other nations, in particular, China." Why did you say that? I mean, what's your sense of this bill?
It's very much seen as part of a larger strategic competition with China. And the Congress is almost united in the need to respond to what it sees as Chinese competition. So when we look at the growth in China's R&D, which is welcome, for general innovation, people felt that the United States, which hadn't been spending enough for the last 20 years, needed to increase the funding. So yes, it is part of a larger competition with China.
But do you think this bill somehow is calling for a tech Cold War with China?
That's a subject of debate in the United States. There's no agreement. Some people, even in this administration, which is much more rational than its predecessor, even in this administration, there's a discussion of how exactly we should reshape tech trade with China, how we should perhaps limit it in some key areas, like semiconductors, like information technology. So yes, there's no consensus yet on the U.S., but in the U.S. on how to split with China, but there is a sense that we will need to curtail tech trade in some ways.
Okay, Professor Liu, I mean, you talk about the necessity on one hand for America to have this kind of bill. How much do you think this can really help America when it comes to science and technological innovation?
Well, this is a good stimuli, and which is applauded by many scientists and also research-based firms. And normally, the U.S. technology innovation is driven by the market, but for scientific discovery, which may not be able to translate immediately into commercial gains, will have to be supported by the tax dollars, which is spending by the federal government. Right now, whether those science firms, how they procedurally can really get access to such a fund, and this seems to be a very ambitious and bullish one, but seems that there's not really a clear plan as how that's going to be distributed. the entire framework is there, but the roadmap is not very clear. However, by how the United States is really sending signal to other countries, because they name China, followed by other countries, which means to maintain the U.S. superiority and supremacy will be able to suppressive to other countries, and whether this type of innovation drive will be able to support a whole framework of human progress, or it is there to suppress or exploit the other countries' innovation. And that's something that remains a big question mark. And now that China is identified as the competitor, as a matter of fact, China is really having a large gap with the United States in terms of the overall technological development level. So China is now being used more like a straw man. And this is something that is really deviating from its very beginning of the nature in supporting science and technology.
James, I saw you nodding your head over there. Does that mean you largely agree with what Professor Liu said?
Well, I don't agree with the straw man part. I think one thing that isn't always realized is many Americans can read Chinese, and so we read the speeches given at party congresses and other things. And China sees itself as a competitor. China sees itself as cutting off Western technology. This is a reaction to what is perceived in the United States as aggressive Chinese behavior. It would be better, of course, if we could work together, but that's not going to happen. So I don't agree that it's a straw man. I do agree that it's useful for the U.S. to put more money in R&D. There's always debate over, who gets it. Should it go to the Department of Energy? Should it go to the National Science Foundation? Yes, that debate will be worked out by the time the bill is actually passed. But China isn't a straw man as far as most Americans are concerned.
Professor Liu, you want to respond?
Yes, I think China is more like reacting to the pressure given by the United States by continuous decoupling on the technological cooperation. And of course, China has own, as a big nation, has its own national pride. And I think only by the number of papers we publish in Science and Nature, or by the number of patents, it does not really count to the exact picture of the entire innovation pace. Because if you read more carefully, most of the Chinese patents are really on the improvement side. It's more of a utility instead of breakthrough technology. So that may be there to support the Chinese national pride, but in reality, we also have a lot of now popularly known as cutthroat technologies that are reliant on the global collaboration. So China is really moving closer to the leadership of the United States, but I'm not that optimistic, although I hope so, that we are able to stay at par or even lead the global innovation.
Well, James, do you agree that this perception of China being this aggressive power is somehow blown out of proportion in Washington for the past few years?
No, I don't think. Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think that it's more a reaction. The last administration was confused very often, and it had a very emotional policy towards China, and that was not helpful. This administration, much calmer, much more steadfast. But they have told me, and I've asked, they said, look, we don't agree with how the Trump policies were carried out, but we agree with the direction of the Trump policies and will continue them. So there's a consensus in the United States that China is a hostile power. And that is based in good measure on how Americans perceive some Chinese actions. So that's where we are. As I say, we can read Chinese speeches as well as you can. And so when we see some of the things said at the party congresses or others, it's hard not to see how this could not be a competition. And it's hard not to think that it will be. It's not
James,
going
I'm
to
sure
be
you
easy
can
to
read
resolve
Chinese
it.
as well as I do, or our fellow colleagues at CGTN, which I have been a couple of times when I was in Washington, or our colleagues in Brookings, but I really don't know, all the American friends over there can read Chinese. Professor Liu, what do you think? Is China this hostile power?
Well, I don't think so. Actually, China always recount to the century of humiliation since the Opium War, and after which we realized that China is lagging far behind despite of our 3,000 years history ahead. And the Westernization movement was really there to be hostile in the first place because the slogan was, we learn the Western skills to combat the Westerners. Because they are there to colonize China, and they are there to pressurize China on unfair gains, etc. But gradually, China moves more inward-looking into seeking modernization, and by shoring up the Chinese living standard, and also by bringing the Chinese industrial might to service its own country. And the third phase is really the globalization process, particularly after our open door policy, to work with the world. And we copied a lot, I should say, from the all Western world, be it Europeans, be it Americans. Many of those technologies are really off the shelf. And so we are really followers. So from being a niche to be a follower, now in certain areas, I do recognize there is really a contending issue over there, but overall, in terms of the industrial cluster, in terms of the the added value that can be computed into the final revenue, so China is still having a large gap. So we boast by frog leaping, and this is not really that easy because that requires not only the manufacturer side, the research side, but the education system and also institutional setting, etc. So we are closer, but we are not even near to the overall technological advancement that is going there in the United States.
Okay, I want to move on a little bit, gentlemen, and talk about the future of this bill. James, do you think that, of course, it's passing the committee right now, do you think the Senate and then the House will eventually pass this bill?
There's almost complete unanimity in the Congress on the need for this bill. The details, of course, as you've heard, will be subject to change, but no, the bill will certainly pass. There's a question of how much funding this fits into larger concerns. There's three bills you need to think about. There's the Infrastructure Bill, the Strategic Competition Act, and the Endless Frontiers Act. And people are trying to figure out which one should get the most money, how much money they should spend. As you know, the Republicans would prefer to spend less money. That's part of the reason we're in this mess now. But yes, it will pass, and it will pass with a substantial amount of funding.
And then how do you expect or foresee this bill in particular boost America's scientific research?
The American-Chinese relationship is very complicated and goes back more than a century. I know that's not much from some historical perspectives, but a few years ago, say 2012, the U.S. was even talking about how do we partner with China to make it a more stable world. No one is talking about that now, right? So I think what you'll see is an effort to reinforce the basic research, reinforce the hard sciences like math and physics and computer sciences materials. Those are the ones that have been underfunded for a decade or more. So you'll see money go to there. You'll see money go to the Department of Commerce, to the National Science Foundation, to the Department of Energy, all to re-accelerate American technological research.
All right, Professor James Andrew Lewis, Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for helping us understanding the American perspective. Thanks. Professor Liu, how do you foresee this bill becoming, playing a role in Biden's overall China policy?
Well, it seems that there is quite a continuation, although to some surprise to many academians that we see the new administration would really shift away from the hostility that was nurtured by the Trump administration, but it seems that this strategy towards China has not really been removed, and it seems that they are getting more prepared in teaming with other countries and also continue to identify China as a common foe to unite the different type of constituencies, particularly to persuade the bipartisan support, etc. So it has not really been changed. And I think on the other hand, as a Chinese, I feel proud that now, we used to be followers, now we are seen as a contender, as a challenger. So which means we are moving faster, and that really scared other people. But on the other hand, you see that, the Industrial Revolution took place in Great Britain, but at that time, was the U.S. really positioned as a contender or as a strategic challenger? No, because the U.S. was there to implement the right type of institution and support education, basic research, and then support commerce. That brought the 70 years of leadership in the U.S. science and technology. So I think China is doing the same. So technology by itself in today's globalized world, you cannot really hold it in a cocoon, and otherwise, what if this money is evaporated? So I used to work for a biotech firm in the United States, and we are eager to transfer our technology to any part of the world, to Africa, to China, to Latin America, etc. So businesses have different calculation of their gains. So merely by, I give you the money, you got to listen to me on a political agenda, this will not really work.
Yeah, there are a lot of political barriers standing in between commerce and trade, of course. Ian Bagg, professor at the European Institute of the LSE, is with us now. Ian, great to have you with us. I mean, from the point of view of a European scholar, how do you look at this new American bill and also the U.S. China tech competition at large?
Well, I think those of us in Europe would say it's a three-way competition: Europe, China, United States, and not just the two that you've been talking about in the program. The fear that Europe has is that it's the one lagging behind and risks being crowded out by the competition that's going on between the US and China. Now, we can understand in European terms why this American initiative is taking place, that they want to insulate themselves from what is seen as the very strong competition emanating from China. But Europeans too need to up their game to find a way of competing with this. One, I think, very strong indication of this is a straightforward league table compiled by Forbes magazine of the top 100 digital companies. The first European one is at number 19, and that's Deutsche Telekom, which is, let's face it, dominated by its old-fashioned telecoms provision, and the next on the list is at 22, and that's SAP. The rest of that top 20 is dominated by American predominantly, but also some Chinese and Korean companies. That's why Europe is scared about this.
Well, thank you for shedding a light on this European perspective. And we also know that the UK government announcement this week includes a proposed law to create the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, or ARIA, as a new statutory corporation to fund, quote-unquote, high-risk and high-reward research and development. What does that mean for, its strategic autonomy goal of Great Britain?
I think it's the same phenomenon as you're seeing elsewhere in Europe, a concern about being able to compete in the future on the basis of our technological capabilities. The ARIA bill, it's a nice touch that it's named after what goes on in an opera, is one in which the attempt will be to promote these new activities based on technology which would not so easily get funding from the markets. It's deliberately designed to have high risk, to tolerate a high failure rate, because that's the way you get the innovation that's going to be the next blockbuster technology. It comes on top of quite a significant financial and academic effort in the UK to try to promote high technology industries in any case, but it's adding a new dimension to an existing policy package.
Yeah, Professor Liu, what kind of a world are we going to be looking at if there's, segregation or a tech cold war, industrial chain? cut up over there. Will there be blocks of nations owning certain technologies and some nations are being cut out?
Well, I don't think so, although it is really the more of the political rhetoric, because as we discussed, first of all, businesses have their own calculation, and now if you really begin a R&D project, companies always calculate the entire global marketplace instead of home. And even for Hollywood to design a movie, they need to calculate the box that they can really receive all around the globe. So whichever country has the big purchase power, and that's the most attractive part for businesses. So this money does not really there to blackmail companies. Well, you got to listen to me. And even though it goes through third countries, now the U.S. Some of the senators are proposing how they can really build a rail against transferring to China, and this does not really happen in any way. But eventually, it is really the market, and also it is really the consumer side that is going to say, okay, this is the technology we need. So along the way, there are errors along, and also there can be deceptive practices along. So the final test is still the market will have the final say.
Ian brought up a very interesting question that is a triangular relationship between China, Europe, and America when it comes to technology cooperation, but also competition. How do you look at that?
Well, the big triad is already in shape. It's not only China, the United States and EU countries, but also Japan is also a good innovation hub, and South Korea is getting also very aggressive, and many other, budding, the emerging economies are also having their say in spreading the R&D expenditure, etc. So it is a team effort. And now, look at the invention and of the COVID-19 vaccine. So, China is really having the clinical studies in Mexico, in Brazil, in Saudi Arabia, etc. It's a collaborative effort. And I used to work for a biotech company. We handle the manufacture in China, but we also have the R&D design in Japan, and also we have the clinical study in Brazil. So this is a global effort which will benefit in the end of consumers and will testified and rewarded by the market in the end. So, merely by hiding in a cocoon, putting technology in an enclave, this will be suicidal.
Yeah, Ian, do you agree the market forces, the aspirations of businesses and entrepreneurs will eventually, break the barriers of geopolitics?
Well, they help, but I think we should not be too optimistic that this is the only way it's going to unfold, because what we've seen over the last 20 years, especially with the rise of China as an economic power, has been other parts of the world not doing so well, at least relatively. And they become concerned about that. The new phrase that's supposed to pervade much of what goes on in Brussels at the moment is open strategic autonomy. It almost sounds like a contradiction in terms. So I've been trying to establish what it really means. It is, yes, we want
autonomy from the U.S. or from China?
From the rest of the world, but I think it was triggered by the rapid rise of China, in some sense being seen in European terms as taking European markets and crowding out European producers. And the way this expression unfolds, open strategic autonomy, is it's a combination of saying, yes, we want to be multilateral, but if we need to put up barriers, then we must. And this is where the tension arises between competition and collaboration at international level. I think your Chinese guest is correct to say that this is the case on something like the vaccine research. But even there, we've seen nationalism being very prominent. The rollout of the vaccine, even the rather strange claims in some parts of Europe about the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was developed outside the European Union, namely in the UK, that highlights the tensions we see in this field of international collaboration.
Yeah,
well, that reminds me of the Chinese ancient philosopher Taoist. He said, whoever holds something that is so dear to have access to other people, people will be thieves. So because you make it prohibitively, impossible for others to access, and when there's a need, for example, if you, rack up the tariff, and you encourage smuggling. And so now, the United States in particular accuse the world, not only China, to steal that technology. But, if you hold it in a cocoon, and definitely there can be access to it through the market demand. So therefore, for that, I really appreciate the Tesla's approach, by open source technology, because they have the confidence. They said, okay, any patent will be outdated technology. So we are able to lead the technological innovation, and we are able to share, the rest of the technology with the rest of the world. I think that's something that is more commendable and also feasible in a globalized world.
Ian, do you agree?
Yes, I think there is a strong need for some of these international collaborative efforts, but still you're going to find some divisions among countries because they fear that they're going to lose their sources of prosperity for the future. And if you look at what's happening at the European level, there are two key words being bandied around by many in Brussels at the moment. One is the Green Deal, which has both a sustainability dimension to it and a desire to be in the lead on some of the new green technologies. And the second is digitalization, where the EU feels, in fact, the whole of Europe feels that it's lagging behind what's happening in China and in the US in some of these areas. And that's why they've set out a whole range of things that have to be done. They include supercomputing, competing in AI, cybersecurity, but also the diffusion of these new digital technologies across the economy. So this is seen as both defensive and offensive in trying to secure position in global markets. Now, I agree with Professor Lee that there are things in this which can be done collaboratively, but competition and concern that you're the loser in this game still is part of the political process.
Yeah, how can we make sure that competition is healthy instead of one of viciousness?
Well, you look at the essence of IP protection. Why do we assign the number of years for protection of monopoly by those inventors? Because that need 17 years or 21 years or 20 years, etc. Because this is there to make a compromise between the incentive for the inventor and also the shared civilization of the humankind. So after the protection period, that's going to be a shared civilization. So, and this is not really
Public
the compromise
domain.
In the public domain. This is not really something to address the political issues that are okay. Now, there is IP protection for the inventor, and now there is also political protection, for the invented technology. So this is something that is really distorting to the true essence of IP protection. And also, on the other hand, will eventually the product be sold to other markets like China? So look at Qualcomm. They are subject to antitrust because they have excessive monopoly and they have predatory pricing over this market. Okay, now slash your margin and sell at a ceiling price. So that's something that other market can even encounter, can even retaliate if you really hold on it, in your treasure box. So this is really a check and balance over the global marketplace versus inventor, politicians, and market reaction.
I have to leave it there. Professor Liu Baocheng, thank you for your insight. As always, great to have you with us. And Ian Begg, thank you for joining us tonight. And also, I want to thank our viewers for tuning in for Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.